My name's Jenny Mattingley. I'm the Vice President for Government Affairs at the Partnership for Public Service. For those of you who don't know the partnership, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit working to build a better government and a stronger democracy. We do that through policy work, government workforce programming, and then convening conversations like this one to really try to help support the federal workforce, particularly now, and really focused on bringing you plain language, easy explainers to all of the things and the challenges that people are going through. And you'll see us out there doing what's a hallmark of the partnership, which is sharing the stories about the incredible work that federal employees do and how that work impacts the country. And you can certainly go to our FedSupport.org website to see more on some of those stories and resources. First off, thank you all for your service. Know that we see you, we hear you, and we are here to support you. With that, a few quick housekeeping notes. Before we kick things off, the disclaimer: content provided during this session is informational only. This is not legal advice. And if you do, I know a lot of people do have legal questions out there. We recommend consulting a qualified attorney to ask about your unique circumstances. We're focused tonight on the private sector and looking at how you transition your career. We will have a Q&A function throughout where you can ask questions. Some folks submitted some ahead of time. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We won't be able to get to everyone, but stay tuned. We'll do our best, and then we can always answer questions later. We'll post this online as well because this is being recorded. And so again, while this is geared towards federal employees, it is an open forum. So just letting folks know, we may have folks joining us from other communities, the media, private sector, places like that. But this is geared towards current and recent federal employees. So before we go on, this is where we get to the exciting part about introducing our guests this evening. And so would love for each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your backgrounds. I'll go to just looking at the order on my computer, Laszlo, and then Patty.
Thank you, Jenny, for having me. And it's great to be with all of you watching and listening. I actually came to the United States as a political refugee from communist Romania, and the idea of America was everything to my family and continues to be. So first, I want to start by saying thank you, all of you, for your service. And you have nothing but my sympathy and empathy and support in the brutal transitions you are all going through right now. And I know Patty feels the same way, but happy to help in any way I can. I had a bunch of jobs, but most notably spent almost 11 years as the head of people at Google, where over that time, my team reviewed over 30 million resumes. I looked at about 100,000 myself and interviewed and helped hire. Since then, I founded 2 technology companies, and I've worked with 3 of the last 4 presidential transition teams and done a little bit in Washington, D.C., and I'm just happy to be here to help in any way I can.
Great. Thank you, Patty. Over to you.
I second the emotion, Laszlo. I feel the same way about, and I'm really honored to be able to be on this with all of you and virtually meet you and help you out if I can. I'm Patty McCord. My most recent memorable job was I was the chief talent officer at Netflix for about 15 years. And then I left and wrote a book called Powerful: Building a Culture of Freedom and Responsibility. And I've been working since then, consulting with very large companies and very small companies. I started as a recruiter, so a lot of my advice for you is going to be from the perspective of the other side, of the people that are hiring people out there. So Laszlo has all his data on resumes. I think I've interviewed a bazillion people. There you go. There's my numerals. So I'm glad to be here and help out if I can.
That's great. If I could get myself off mute, that would be even better. But, as I sit here with folks who are from the technology world, well, this is a good place, as you've talked about recruiting, resumes, other things. I think for a lot of the federal employees that I've talked to, some have been in and out of private sector, but many have spent their careers in public service, whether it's state and local or federal. And so the idea of now transitioning to private sector, everybody's heard that federal resume is different, federal interviews are different, federal job announcements are different, the skill sets. And I think there's a lot of worry about that. What, if you have some general advice maybe one or two pieces of general advice as people are starting to think, is the private sector for me? And how do I even get started? And I don't know, Patty or Laszlo, if one of you wants to
I'll
jump
pop
in.
in. I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides of the equation. And, the preconceived notions we have about both types of employment have been proven wrong. One of them is, you join the federal government and you've got a job for life, and all you have to do is stay in there and move from your GS ranking 1, 2, 3, 4. My dad was a federal government employee. And that preconceived notion transfers to the private sector too, and it's not true in either place. So my reputation is that I'm a fierce truth teller, and that's the truth. So I know you're not finding yourself in any different place that most of the people in the private sector haven't found themselves in at one time or the other. It's just the way it goes.
I would add two things to Patty's good comments. One is the corporate side, the business side actually loves people who have served in the government because there's a few attributes that come along with government service. You tend to be an expert in your field. You tend to be incredibly conscientious, and conscientiousness and follow through and caring actually make you better at any job. And you tend to be very service focused. And all those are attributes that employers value. Um, Most employers see service in the government and say this is a positive thing. Some are skeptical, and so sometimes you have to explain that, and we'll get into it. But those are qualities you all have that the private sector loves. The second thing is that most people I know who are in federal service or government service do it in part because of a feeling of mission. They're doing something important for this nation, for their community. And often people look at working for a company and say, that's not going to be meaningful at all. That's just making money. That's true and it's not true. There's a professor at Wharton named Amy Rosinski who found that whatever the job is, only about a third of people find it meaningful. A third do it just to make ends meet, and a third view it as a game. They want to climb the ladder. And the lesson there is you can find meaning in all kinds of work. So, if you're a plumber, one way of viewing it as you're just like fixing toilets. The other is you're actually helping people stay healthy. You're staving off disease. You're like making the quality of life better for people. And so as you think about the corporate world, I would urge you to think about what is meaningful about those jobs and who are the human beings you're actually helping, whether it's an executive job, a customer support job, a plumbing job, because there's human beings on the end of those jobs too, where you can really make a difference.
It's a good point. And it's also, it depends as well. There's large companies, small companies, nonprofit. I mean, private sector is a pretty diverse place in terms of being able to find mission and meaning. So it's certainly something. But going off of that, one of the things I hear too is people think, well, I'm looking for a job. I've lost my job, but I need to wait and find the perfect job with the perfect, perfect mission alignment, perfect thing. And I've sort of curious where you think. I've sort of said, sometimes you have to find just your next job, not, as you're in this place. And I don't know if that resonates with you or if that's just sort of my way.
I would say, first of all, before you make those opinions about what to do next, take a little look in the mirror and go back and look at your career so far. And for me, at least, some of the biggest lessons I've learned and some of the most powerful things that have happened to me that have made me successful are things that kind of sucked. And so, like, none of us have been in that perfect job our whole lives. They all have, pros and cons and give and take. And so while I think it's a great aspiration, I think that it's for me and most of the people that I know that are successful, the perfect job is one that you're pretty good at and that other people appreciate what it is that you're good at. I'm going to say that one more time, right? My saying is what you love to do, that you're extraordinarily good at doing, something we need someone to be great at. Okay, one more time. I used to call it my algorithm for success because I worked with a bunch of engineers and they love when you use math terms, right? Is what you love to do. So first you got to think about, what is that you're extraordinarily good at doing. You may be an amazing quilter, and unless you work for a quilting company, might not matter, right? Is what you love to do, that you're extraordinarily good at doing, something we, the company that's hiring you, need someone to be great at.
I would add that's That's a great lens. Going in a bit of a different direction. And this is part of my own, like how I grew up. Immigrant family, ups and downs financially, um, was worried about making ends meet a lot of time and just having a job. And so I was never one of these people who took like 3 months off between a job. Like, I had a job, I interviewed, I got a new job. Ended one job Friday, I started the Monday because I needed the money. And even later in my career as an executive, I didn't want to break. So my advice would be back to Jenny, your question. What I've seen is it's better to have any job than no job.
Mhm.
And while you're figuring out kind of where you want to be and finding that fit, which can take a long time, if you find a job that's like a pretty good fit, take the job. And on your first Monday at work, go home and keep looking for your next job because you don't have to do it forever. But the reason is when you are in the job market and you don't have a job, you're competing with everyone else who doesn't have a job. And then a week later, a bunch of new people, especially these days, are flooding the job market, and that's your competition. And then spring rolls around and all the new college graduates enter the job market. And the longer you are without a job, the more new entrants there are who are also looking. And employers are many things, but one of them is biased. And one of those biases is if you haven't done something for a while, they're going to choose somebody who has done something more recently. So my advice would be, and this is a little maybe counterintuitive, is better to take almost any job you can get as a stopgap and then keep looking. And, if it's a job that's like, I mean, my first job out of college was waiting tables at the Olive Garden. It's not on my resume. I don't brag about it. And that's not what I told employers I was doing. Um, but it made ends meet, and I kept looking for a job, and then I found something where, I got to wear something other than an Olive Garden uniform.
And you probably look back and think about how much that experience actually, you know, formed who you are, right?
Oh, I learned so
I mean,
much.
so that's the thing about like,
Yeah.
in both sides, in any job, you're going to learn something about that you didn't know before, period. And you may learn, one of the things you may learn that's really valuable is what you don't want to do anymore. Right. Well,
And I learned that as an adult, right? As a long time, somebody who's at an executive level in government or in the private sector, there are things I am just should not be
yeah,
doing.
but you kind of don't know until you try, right? It's
Right.
one of the things when I'm coaching like new grads, I often say the same thing as you. Take any job because if you hate it, you'll learn what you hate, and you kind of don't know yet, right? You don't know until you do it. So
That's right.
And, to your point, one of the things that happens, like when you have a job, Patty and Jenny, it shapes a big part of your identity, particularly if it's a service-oriented job. A couple of years ago, Google, my former employer, fired 12,000 people by cutting off their access to systems at 3 a.m. And the way people found out was they got an email to their personal email saying you're no longer an employee, but not everybody checks their email before going to work. So people were literally showing up at the offices trying to badge in, and their badges just weren't working anymore. So I know this probably sounds and feels familiar. And the question that came out of it was like, probably like many of you, this is such a big part of my identity. How do I like reset and how do I look forward? And Patty's reminding me, you learn from every job. But there's that stereotype about people who never start talking about the good old days. Who like,
right,
their
right.
winning touchdown in high school, they were homecoming queen and all this. You don't want to be that person. You want to treasure the work you did and the memory of it and honor it. And that's who you are. And work should be meaningful, but it doesn't have to be your identity.
Mhm.
And so, as awful as this experience is, it's also a chance to, exactly as Patty said, really reflect on, okay, who am I really? There was the job, and who I was made me great at that job, but who I am is going to make me great at something else. So let me pivot and focus. And it's part of my history, but it's not who I am anymore,
Mhm. Mhm.
and move forward.
Mhm.
I think that's a great segue into the next question I hear from a lot of folks. And before I get to the next question, I'm being told by our producers to remind the audience that this is recorded so you can watch it later and you can put questions in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. But one of the questions I've heard ahead of time is that speaking about those skills and about trying to find that next job, trying to, for some folks, especially if you haven't done this for a long time, updating a resume and thinking about what's using cover letters or not, um, talking about your experience, particularly in the federal sector, trying to talk about private sector and translate some of those words and phrases into things? I mean, you both have seen many, many resumes. How should the folks on the call, on the webinar here, think about getting the first step, which is, I think, getting the resume together to think about those skills?
The practical stuff. Shall I start, Laszlo?
Yeah, please.
Remember that whatever you do, write a resume, put it on your computer, right? You can format it any way you want it. You can do it chronologically, you can do it by job title, you can do it by segment, you can do however you want to do it. Get as many words as you possibly can on this document I'm going to call your source document. Okay. And that is not the resume that you're going to send to every company that you apply for. Right? It's just your source document so that you can go back and do your homework. Well, what year did I start that? And when did I move? And did I have a title then? And what, and then dive down into the technical skills of what you did in each job. Really, really self-assess what you know how to do. And then remember that resumes get you interviews and interviews get you jobs. And the resume needs to speak to the job. And what I mean by that is when you see a published job description online, which is where they all are now, right? You're going to look and it's going to have the words of the private sector company that you're applying to. Those are the words that matter. So what you want to do is you want to apply to their job. So they're not out there looking for you. They're looking for someone who will be really great at the problem that they have to solve. So people hire other people into their company because they want to do more. They have a problem that isn't being solved, or they have a skill hole on their team. That's in general, like why people hire other people, right? Sometimes it's because you get an opening in the budget and you can't, right? So you go out and you hire as many people. You're still going to hire people to do your work. So every single time you apply, my recommendation is that you redo your resume and speak in their terms. So if they say, I'm looking for somebody with XYZ computer program or, I don't know, Microsoft Word document, right? Well, if you use Google Docs, it's the same thing, right? So you can say, if you do respond to that one, I'm fluent and familiar with Google Docs, which is a very similar program to Microsoft Word that you're asking for, right? Because who's going to review your resume is either someone who's going to flip through it as fast as they can at home on the kitchen floor, or a bot, or AI, or some sort of resume scanning software. And what they're going to pick up on is Microsoft Word. Right. So that's the really important part, is pay really close attention to the job description, because the closer you can match to that job description in the words that you use on your resume, the more likely you are to get an interview. And remember, resumes get you interviews and interviews get you jobs. Laszlo.
I love it. I've one very tactical piece of advice, and I also and I'm not a consultant, but I do have one of my posted or pinned LinkedIn articles is about the title is my personal formula for winning resume, and it is as follows. Every bullet on your resume you should try to quantify using the following formula. You accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z. So a lot of resumes describe activity. I was a project manager. I managed a budget. I was responsible for, I led a team. But for an employer, people get attached to actual numbers, and you want to be able to showcase how you did it to differentiate yourself from the 400 other thousand people who managed a budget and led a team. So for example, I remember talking to a new grad, and she said she managed a sorority budget. That was on her resume. But accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z turns from managed sorority budget to managed $31,000 spring 2020 budget. So it's quantified, and invested $10,000 in idle funds in high yielding capital notes, returning 5% over the year. So same person, but they put the money in a checking account or a savings account. They switch from checking to savings, 5% return. They look like a genius, right? So it's really, really critical. Accomplished X as measured by Y, by doing Z, because that shows employers how you did the work and it quantifies it. And to Patty's point, when people are flipping through resumes, or whether when they have a machine flipping through it, they look for these kind of numbers and brands and things to fixate on. So you want your accomplishments to pop. The second thing I'll say very quickly about resumes is in the government, 2 to 5 page resumes are standard, even required. In the private sector, 1 page is standard. If you have less than 10 years experience, it's a 1-page resume. If you have more than 10 years, maybe 2 pages. But unless it's an academic job or some nonprofit jobs, 2 pages is the absolute maximum you want to have.
Right.
And I think
I was going to say, and you made a point earlier where you didn't put Olive Garden on your resume.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to go back to birth.
Yeah.
Right. It's like and that's, again, paying attention to what they're asking for in the job description. If the job description is really forcefully highlighting a couple of things, they don't really need to know, that whatever your first job was, right? Waiting tables.
Yeah, it's almost like the resume in the first conversation. It's like a first date, right? I mean, eventually the other person, if things work out and you get married, like they're gonna know where you went to school and what your dog's name was, and every like who stole your blanket when you were 4 years old and how you got it back. They're gonna know everything. But on the first date, that's not what you want to cover. You just want they just want to know you're a caring, capable, conscientious person. And Patty's exactly right. Their job description will tell you what to highlight. The rest stays on that master document you described.
Yeah, and that's really helpful because for the folks listening to this, they all have what I would air quote the federal resume, right? That's typically when I came the first time I went into government, they took my 2-page resume and said, "But you need to blow this out to 10 pages and tell us everything you did." And I sort of went, I don't even know how to go the opposite. And now I've been around government long enough to see it. And so now people are having the opposite of trying to cut that down to 2 pages. And so the focus is the key there.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have that as your source document. Right. You can still have 10 pages as your source document, but when you're applying for a job, you're applying for their job. So you want to match there's lots we can talk about the differences. And I think we really should. And that's one of them. But Laszlo, you said something when we were talking before we got on today about cover letters. Can you give us your perspective on cover letters? Again, I love that.
Yeah, thanks. And Jenny, I know you mentioned that too. So the cover letter is a necessary evil. It's all about defense. It's almost impossible to say anything in a cover letter that's going to cause somebody to go, "Oh my God, I need to hire this person. They're the best thing in the world." But it is possible to get kicked out if you have a typo, if you have the wrong company name in it, which happens all the time. So the main thing is don't screw it up. And there's, the way you should structure your cover letter. This is how a perfect cover letter goes. First paragraph, introduce yourself. It's 1 sentence. What you're applying for, mention any connection. I'm Laszlo Bock. I'm applying for assistant marketing manager. I was introduced by Patty. My friend Patty works at the company. First paragraph. Second paragraph expands on that intro. So maximum of 3 sentences, short sentences about why you like the company or about your experience or something like that. So you just expand a little bit about who you are. Paragraph 3 is why they should hire you specifically. So this is your argument about why me, why I'm the best person for this assistant marketing manager job, better than anybody else out there. Again, 3 sentences maximum. Fourth paragraph, promise to follow up. And the reason you want to say, "I will follow up in 2 weeks if I haven't heard back," is because number 1, then they know they're going to have to follow up with you or you're going to pester them. And number 2, so you psychologically give yourself permission to pester them. Because
Yes.
otherwise you feel kind of annoying, right?
Yeah.
And then the final thing,
they won't pester you.
no.
It's not in most people's DNA, right? And so, and again, just to be real, they're unlikely to pester you if you don't come in for an interview, right? If you've gotten to a phone screen or something. But the other thing is when you get into the interview or you get into the phone screen, it's perfectly okay to say, "How are you going to follow up with me?" Right? So it's not a date. I mean, it is the metaphor breaks down.
It breaks down a little. It's imperfect.
Because you don't have to wait for him to call. Like you say, are you going to call or not?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's also the metaphor breaks down too, because it's easier to leave a job than, break up with somebody. Breaking up with somebody is much harder than leaving a job. So it's a terrible metaphor, except for that very first part.
Yeah, but you do want to get to the date, right?
Yeah.
That's the point. It's like, the point of the profile is to get to the date. So that's the point of the resume is to get to the interview.
Yeah.
That's good. And I'm going to pause there for a moment because I see my colleague Jackson jumped on, which means he's gotten a bunch of questions that he wants to flag for us.
Ooh, Jackson, what do we got?
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so I've gotten a number of questions in the chat around cutting down a resume. How do you, if for folks who have 6, 10-page resumes and want to cut things so that what they're left with is non-linear, how do you show that you still were employed for a period of time if you're cutting an experience that is not related to the job that you're applying to? And does it matter? Do you need that on there? So if you've got 40 years of experience and you're only showing 3 relevant jobs, how do you say, oh, I was still working during that other time, but this is what you should care about that's relevant?
Well, I think you're talking about 2 different things. One of them is gaps, and the other one is, going back to birth, right? So let's take the 40-year experience. If the most relevant experience that you have is in the last 10 years, for example, then emphasize the last 10 years, and then you can summarize the years before that as, progressive, increasing responsibility in various jobs, and list your job titles if you want. I mean, you can summarize those and focus on the stuff that's relevant. If it's a gap in employment, just say so, right? Gap in employment to, go back to school to raise your kids, whatever it is. I mean, you might as well tell the truth, because like Laszlo says, it's going to come out anyway.
And to be clear, neither of us is suggesting, like I worked at a consulting firm called McKinsey before Google. Neither of us is suggesting you completely take that off. And so you have a 4-year gap where you finish a job 1 year and then 4 years later you start another job. You want all the time accounted for. You just, as Patty said everything else correct. But that I just want to clarify that if what somebody heard was just take it off and have a blank spot, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Right.
And you don't have to, I think the point is you don't have to put as much detail and bullet points and do that. You can truncate the jobs, or they don't have to be chronological either necessarily.
It's kind of a mind shift, and it's hard. I mean, I remember doing it as a recruiter, as like, well, here's my order and I need to fill the order. Right. My order says I need 5 to 7 years progressive experience in this kind of management, in this kind of situation. Right. And the truth is, if I have 5 to 8 years, that's fine too. Right. So it's about taking all that detail that you've spent so much time putting together in your 10-page resume and kind of stepping back at first and go, what are the trends here? And it's part of the so what am I good at? Right.
Well,
So
and Patty and I, we've both written books, and one of the phrases your publisher will tell you is you write something and you think it's amazing, and then they say in publishing there's a phrase, kill your darlings, which is a terrible phrase, but the idea is, you write all this stuff you think is brilliant, but it's actually really better if you cut like a third of it. And so as you're going through your life history, everything you've done, it goes back to Patty's point. The employer is hiring for a specific thing, and it's great that you did all this other stuff. You want to highlight those specific things, and the other things you cut to get down to 1 or 2 pages. And that's not going to feel good. Like, those are accomplishments, those are awards, those are people you work with. It's going to feel terrible. But again, there's time to share all that after you get married, right? Like, you don't need that up front.
So I've got a couple questions for you all that are much more, you would probably only hear these largely in the federal space, not only in the federal space, but more so. I'll list out 2 questions real quick. They're both very different, but at least put them out there and we can get to those. One is about many federal employees work in a classified environment, right? Their national security, their law enforcement, whatever it is. So they cannot quantify some of their accomplishments in the same way that others can. So how might they tackle that from a perspective if you were to get a resume from somebody who had been in the classified space? And the second one is a lot of the federal employees coming out now, certainly by not all of them, but many have been, mid-career GS 13, 14, 15, or senior executives for the last decade, right? They're at the more senior level, they're closer to retirement age. How are they thinking about it coming out at a higher level and sort of a longer tenured career? So we've got the classified issue and the sort of longer tenured folks.
Patty, you want to take one or the other?
I'll take the classified one. I think you can talk about, again, Laszlo's formula works pretty well there, right? What are your accomplishments? What did you, stating what you did, what you accomplished, how it resulted without, exposing super secret stuff, right? And you can also say, this is a classified position. And I think people will understand what that means. If it's so classified that you can't write a resume, then you're, that's problematic, but I don't think anything is. I mean, the people, remember that the private sector isn't completely clueless about what happens in government. Most of us have friends or family, we're connected there anyway. So I would say, it's perfectly okay in the interview process to say, sorry, that's classified, I can't talk about it. But you should be prepared to say, but the kind of work that I did was like what you're looking for in this way, right? This is how we would approach a problem like that, right? The other thing to do to kind of get around that, and a really good interview technique, is to walk into every job interview and try and figure out what's the problem they're trying to solve. So that's why you hire somebody. You don't have enough people. You don't have anybody that knows how to do what you need to do. The people that you have aren't doing it, right? Whatever it is, right? So what you want to fish for is what is that problem? So you can say, tell me more about what would this job entail in this particular area? And you can say, oh yes, I've done that sort of thing, and just describe that way you approach the work. You don't have to be specific about what the work was.
Well, I'll take the other one then. If you're older in the workforce, as I have slowly become, it's very true. There is age-based bias, and it's a very real thing. Added to the long list of biases people face in the workforce. So I think there's 3 or 4 things I would suggest. One is when you're writing your resume, bundle large periods of time together in the way Patty suggested in the prior example, talking about, progressive experience over such and such time and so on. So kind of collapse that, and you could just have the years, or you don't even have to have the early years, right? Like if you started your career in the 1980s or 1990s, you might just have some text that says progressive experience doing da da da. And remember, the number of words you spend on something communicates the importance. So if you're trying to de-emphasize that you started working in the 80s or 90s, just describe it in 2 sentences. And then have your next job be listed as, 1995 to whatever, you had such and such job, and then off you go. So that's number 1, bundle a bunch of stuff. The second is in your accomplishments and in the kinds of jobs you look for, really lean into your expertise, because that's what comes with age, wisdom and expertise. And so err on the side of having more technical details in what you do, whether you worked at the IRS, whether you worked in a scientific field, whether you worked in Social Security, you're going to have technical knowledge. So name drop that stuff. And I don't know your fields well enough, but there's laws you can refer to and codes you can refer to and processes. Add in a little jargon, which will be a little inaccessible to a corporate recruiter, but will cause them to go like, whoa, this person really knows their stuff. The third thing is you're going to have to apply to more things. So more volume because of the bias. And it means you might have to flex a little more than somebody who's sort of earlier mid-career on things like what geography you're willing to entertain. Are you willing to be in the office or not? What industry, what role, what level? But again, going back to the earlier point, just get a job, even if it's not the perfect one. because, being, 52 or 53 or 54 and looking for a job and then out of work for a year is different from being 52 and having taken a cut in stature and looking for a job and then getting that next big thing. Because remember, there's fewer jobs at senior levels too. So you need to park yourself someplace while that senior job opens up. And then the final piece of advice would be think hard about whether as an interim thing you want to affiliate with a local university or a think tank or a nonprofit in a senior advisor kind of role or lecturer or something like that. Those organizations tend to love free labor. Sometimes they'll even pay a little bit, but it gives you a brand to hang on to that doesn't diminish your experience and wisdom and give you sort of some cover in terms of activity while you're looking for your dream job.
Yeah,
I think that's a great point right there, is that, and I've heard other folks say that, and I coach folks too about that, is volunteer. It at least gives you something that's still in your wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Well,
and
and
also
sorry,
go ahead.
just to close on that, if you're volunteering though, ask the executive director of the nonprofit, just say, what should I call this thing? Because if you're like, if God bless you, you're like working in a soup kitchen or you're working for Habitat for Humanity and you're hammering nails, please keep doing that work. But if it's something that's connected to your background, that you might leverage into something, just go to the executive director. You don't need like a formal agreement to say like, hey, can I call this a senior advisor, senior consultant, senior something? And the executive director will go, sure. And now you can, with integrity, put on your resume that you were a senior advisor to Habitat for Humanity in Baltimore.
Yeah, I have 2 points. One of them is also if you're more senior and you've managed people, that matters a lot. And you probably, because a lot of jobs tend to be in government, you grow up by the size of your org chart, right? You go farther up the pyramid because the number of people below you increases, and that matters a lot. And people are always looking for people who are good managers. So that's really important. The other one is to realize that a job that you can count on with the pension and retirement is over, right? And I coach people all the time and say, there's a lot of ways of working. There's consulting, there's volunteering, there's temp work, right? So, and I always coach CEOs and say, they're all, excuse me, leftover cold cards in your deck, but you can do that too. That's part of the way to get through, right? You can volunteer, you can work temporarily. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you've got the cold. I have the allergies going in the DC area. We've got lovely cherry blossoms. And so, I think that's we're talking about skills and resume. The next step, I want to spend a few minutes on, I know we've got both some other questions around salary negotiations and other things in the private sector, which we'll get to. But before we get there, obviously the next step is, if you do get an interview, are there some, I know, right? You've done the cover letter, the way Laszlo said, you've done your resume, you found a job, you're now that you've applied for and you've gotten the interview. Are there some, a couple things about like, what are some of the best practices currently in interviewing for jobs? And I think a nuance, and I'll throw this out there so we can get there, but we don't forget, a lot of folks in the federal sector are getting removal for performance reasons. And I air quote that because it's not necessarily performance. There are these broad layoffs that have a performance thing. And so how should somebody speak to that if it comes, will that even come up in an interview? Do they need to worry about that? Once we get beyond that question, what are the best practices?
Before we go there, I want to talk briefly about networking, which is, it's really important who you know and who knows what you know. So your neighbors, your friends, your kids' teachers, everybody you've ever touched, your vendors you work with, anybody who's outside of the government that you've ever encountered, anybody who knows what you know, ask them. So that's part of the way you get past the paperwork and into the interview process.
Okay, that was courageous of you to push through that coughing. I'll jump in on these. Number one, for the interview. So interview and how do you handle performance reasons? For the interview, there's a lot, if you just Google how to do a good interview, there's sort of like a structure everyone suggests. But here's the secret. And where this comes from is I had no idea how to interview. Like I said, graduated college without a job. Then I went to get an MBA and nobody picked me to interview with them after my first year. And I barely got a job that summer. And then I like really tried to figure this out. And I got 13 job offers, one from every company I interviewed at. And then again, ended up at Google where we made a science of this. So number one, you can predict 95% of the questions you're going to get asked, right? What are my strengths, weaknesses? Why this company? Tell me about a time you solved a hard problem. Tell me about your project management experience. How many teams? Patty's heard all these things a million times, right? So you can predict those. And if you can't, just Google common interview questions. You get a whole bunch. Number two, you need to practice your answers for each of those questions. So what I did in business school was I had a notepad and I wrote down, here are the 20 questions. And then for each one, I wrote out my answer. And I tried to have one or two answers to the same question, like different ways of answering it. And the reason you want more than one answer to each question is when you interview, you'll often meet a couple people. And if one person asks about your leadership experience and another person asks about leadership, you want to give different answers because first person may not have liked your answer. So you want somebody else at the end of the day to go, well, actually, I think Laszlo was great because here's the answer he gave. So ideally, you want to have a couple answers for each of these 20 questions, and you want to practice them out loud. And the reason you practice them out loud, not forever, just a few times, is when you're in the interview. You don't want to be thinking about your answer. You want to be watching the other person and looking in their eyes and reading the body language and going, is this going well or not? And to be able to do that, your brain needs to be free. And if you're trying to answer the question, you can't. So guess the 20 questions, write down your answers, practice them out loud. And what's amazing about this is no one does this. And so they go into an interview and they kind of like wing it and make stuff up. But if you do this, you will sound so much better and so much more powerful and capable. You'll have a much higher win rate against people with more experience, more expertise, people from the private sector. So that's the interview piece.
150%. Another good trick that I coach people to use is call your voicemail. Two things: either do it with give somebody else in your family your script and interview with them. That's kind of fun but you just want to hear the words come out of your mouth, right? Like, isn't it amazing how when we talk in our heads we sound so brilliant, and then when we open our mouths we sound really, so you want to practice having the words come out. So one of the tricks that I use is I call my voicemail and I practice saying the words, right? And then let it sit for a little bit and then go back and listen to it as if you're the other person, right? Put yourself in their shoes and you'll realize, God, she sounded kind of, sure of herself, or who does she, or whatever. And the other trick is, no matter how many times you've done it, Laszlo and I have interviewed a bazillion people, we're still nervous. Oh, sorry. The people that are interviewing you are nervous too, or they're in a hurry, or they're thinking of other things. So you're right that if you're nervous and they're nervous, then you can spend the whole time just not talking about what's really important. So the more confident you are, the better you're going to come across.
And so here's another question for you, and Laszlo, you may have this, but
Jenny, before I want to go back to your performance review.
We'll go. Yeah, we can go to that, but before we leave, because I'm thinking about the prepping of interview questions. The one thing I get asked all the time lately is AI. Do I use AI to help me with my resume, help me with prep for the interview, help me think through my answers? Yes, no, I come from the pre-AI era of doing all these things, so I haven't had a great answer.
The short answer is sure, why not? The only thing to keep in mind is the error rate on AI generated answers is something like 30 to 40%. And so if you ask it, like if you go right now, like I tried this months ago. I told one of the AI products to do a resume for me, and it was nicely formatted and everything. And it said I worked in a bunch of fields I never worked in. Like it just made things up. So, yeah, it can't hurt. It's practice if you don't have anyone else to do it with. But it's highly error prone. And then there's AI detectors. The one thing I will say about AI is because a lot of companies are using either technology or kind of early stage AI to screen resumes, it is helpful on a resume you're submitting, like on a website, to have a section where you basically just name drop a bunch of keywords, right? So you look in the job description or look up the company culture, and it's just a laundry list of experienced in, and then you list 6 programming
Right,
languages. Or if their culture is, they're a team-oriented, hard-driving culture, you should say team-oriented, hard-driving, blah, blah, blah.
right,
And
right.
the systems will find that. So I don't think it'll hurt as long as you double check it to make sure it's accurate, but it's not a panacea.
And I don't, and it's so loosely bandied around as a phrase, right? I mean, no one, the people who are hiring people who are experienced in AI, who are going to write AI programs from an engineering perspective, I think they're very specific roles that almost nobody's qualified for. So it's just, it's today's buzzword. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Nobody's going to go tell me about, your deep use of AI unless if they say it in the job description, then there's areas.
Yeah.
Then don't
That's
fake
right.
it. Right.
That's
Then,
right.
oh yeah. Then don't do what Laszlo said, go, oh, AI made my resume. Like,
Do not do that.
So, but don't lie. Don't
Yeah.
lie, right? You can, and don't be careful about embellishment, right? Because it's always going to come through. And there is nothing that breaks trust more than finding out somebody that lied on their resume.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad. Don't do that.
Or in an interview as well. Goes both ways. Laszlo, you mentioned the performance question that I had. I know that's on folks' mind, and I heard Patty say earlier, people know what's going on right now, but I'm curious your response to that question.
Yeah, don't worry about it at all. No, nobody cares that these were branded as performance related. Quite frankly, that's all bullshit. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
The
Yeah.
general sense from outside Washington, D.C. or outside the federal government is this is unjust and it's just punitive, vindictive politics and trying to wreak vengeance on, a lot of what like, for example, I heard Ezra Klein call progressive coded jobs and parts of the government. So don't worry about it, number one, because outside, we all know you're good people. Number two, so many companies have done layoffs in the last 5 years in pretty brutal and arbitrary ways. And some, like Meta, formerly Facebook, say it's performance related, which is total BS because they had normal processes to manage people out if it was performance rated. Others don't. But the result is in the marketplace, nobody asks and nobody cares. Like if you're in the market, they assume, particularly coming out of the government, they assume you were screwed over and they're probably going to want to help you.
Yep. Yep.
Usually Patty salty one of us.
Even when it really happens, right? Even when it really happens, you should, you can live through this too. People do all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's right. It happens in both public and private sector.
You move on. I mean.
Yep. So let's go. We're on our journey here. We've done, resumes. We've talked a little bit about networking. We talked interview. The last piece I know we've got some questions on from folks is in the federal government, you don't negotiate salary, particularly you don't negotiate benefits. If you get a job offer, it's sort of all set out for you. And so, I mean, there might be little bits, but by and large, no. How should they think about it in the private sector? If they've gotten a job offer at a large corporation at a mid-career level, what should they be thinking about in that sense?
Laszlo, you did such a good job of this when we were practicing.
Sure. And yeah, and Jenny, there was some crackle that went away when you muted, so I don't know if it was on your side. You should absolutely negotiate. You should absolutely not disclose your salary up front. And the way you should do this is, number one, because by the way, public sector salaries tend to be lower than private sector salaries. And by the way, they can be lower by a lot. I mean, there's jobs where, I mean, I know there's hard caps in the federal system. I mean, I'll tell you, if there's a company with 100,000 employees, they probably have at least 500 people making $1 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
$1 million a year. And then below that, they probably have another few thousand making 500,000 to $1 million a year, right? Like there's a lot. So don't give up that leverage. So number one, there are some states that require, including California, job ranges to be posted for jobs. And that won't give you the exact, but it'll give you a very wide range. So any job you apply for, the first thing you want to do is find a similar job at a similar company in California and see what the range is. That'll give you a ballpark. The second thing is when somebody asks you how much you're making or how much you made, you don't say, here's how much I made. You sort of, whoever goes first loses. So what you want to say is, especially coming from the government to private sector, you want to instead say something like, well, the public sector pays differently. And it's in part because we have pensions and generous benefits and generous leave policies. All those are very valuable, and in part because we believe in service. So we're willing to give up salary in exchange for service. The private sector is different, so it's not a good benchmark. What is the job pay? And then you go back and forth a few times, and if they really won't tell you, then you finally say, based on what you see from California, or just search on the web for what those jobs pay, take it with a grain of salt. Then you say, well, my expectation would be, X number. And and then you take it from there. But as soon as you put a number there, that's where you are. So you want to wait and you want to get as much information. You want them to go first.
Yeah.
Patty, you're known for negotiating really well on this stuff.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, particularly for women, I mean, so it's bad enough for women, period. Women in government's even worse. But Laszlo's advice is 100, they go first, right? What's the job pay? You don't need to disclose that because what they will do, this is how it works on the company side. They will say, oh, you make $50,000 a year, so I'm going to give you 6.5% on top of that because that's what our average salary increase is, right? I'm going to give you the salary increase. So so then you get the job and the merit increase budget comes around and you get it's 6.5% is average and you get 12%, right? And you're just thrilled, and everybody, HR and your manager goes, you got 12%, that's amazing. And then you go look outside and you find out that the average person in the company makes 75, and you'll never catch up. Mm-hmm. So this is your one moment where you can come in where you belong, right? And the other thing I tell people in corporate America who are working and wondering about their salary, that the very best way to find out what you're worth is go interview. Mm-hmm. So you're worth what that company is willing to pay for, remember my algorithm, to pay for somebody who's really good at something they need somebody to be really good at doing. Right. And the right person gets a great salary, no matter where you go. Right. It's also supply and demand. So if you're in finance, for example, most of those jobs are titled the same across industries. And you can get pretty good information about that because an accounts payable supervisor is a pretty standard job in most companies. So again, that you're going to want to research regionally, and you're going to research in the size of your company and all of those things. But they'll just ask them, right? That's the other part, is like you also have power in the interview by being the one who asks questions. And if that's not how you're used to interviewing, that's the part where Laszlo's advice to practice is huge. Because if how you're used to doing it is to passively sit there and wait for somebody to ask you the question so that you can give them your pat answers, it's not going to give somebody an insight into what it is you love to do, what you're extraordinarily good at doing, why you're interested in the job, how you could be amazing. And you want to always be amazing. You want every single person who spends time with you to say, she'd be great. Right? You want, and I used to say to my recruiters, we want every person that leaves this company to want the job, even if we hate them. Because they're going to come and say to Laszlo, my next door neighbor, hey, I interviewed at Google and they didn't choose me. And you say, oh, but you know what? You'd be great at this. So the networking happens all the time. So even if you interview and don't get the job, now that person knows what you know. So someone else in the company might say, well, I'm looking for somebody. Oh, wait, I interviewed this woman who would be really great for your job. So it's really important. And then I want to say a couple of really practical things. Go early. Before you go to your interview, go early, sit in the lobby, wherever it is you're waiting, and pay a lot of attention, right? Who's talking to who? What kind of clothes are they wearing? How are they treating the receptionist? Right? Who's walking in and out? Who has power? Who doesn't? Pay attention to their body language. If everybody else is super casual and you're wearing your suit and tie, go to the men's room and take off the tie. I mean, we know where you came from. You just don't, you want to try and fit in as much as you can. That said, always look professional no matter where you're interviewing. Right? You should always be clean and presentable and look professional. And, it's not the time to be really crazy. You can get the job and be crazy, but don't be crazy during the interview. Pay attention. All your cues can happen before you ever meet anybody. Are they on time? Are they prepared? Right? They're just going to tell you a lot about the team that you're joining.
Patty, those are great, because I always think about too, I mean, yes, there's the part about getting a job because you need a job, and you do want an environment that fits with your needs, what you're looking for. So you learn about the job as well when you're on the interview.
I mean, I've done so much coaching with women. And I mean, like, go early and watch the conversations and who has the upper hand.
That's right.
And if everybody's coming out and leaning on the receptionist desk and going, honey, how are you today, sweetheart? You know a whole lot about that company. So, that may be happening where you work now, but just pay attention and then get the vibe. And
Yeah, that's a good.
And every single interview you get is worth something. It's a learning experience every single time, right? And you might learn, and you probably will pretty quickly, that a lot of people are really terrible at it, at interviewing. And so the more you can control it so they get to know you better, the better you're going to look.
That's great advice. I know we're getting to the end, and I know people probably have way more questions that we didn't get to, but Laszlo, I want to give you a chance to also say some last words, and then we'll close out with a very quick survey for folks on the phone or on the webinar to, I don't know why I keep calling it a phone. I've got to get into the 2025 here. On the video screen on the webinar, we'll have a quick survey just for other topics and things that happen. So Laszlo, take us home with a quick last word of advice.
Well, I would just say that this job search process is difficult and frustrating, and it takes a long time, and you take a lot of swings, and almost everyone's going to fail until you get that one job. So, number one, you find a way to find some resilience. That might mean, going running or working out. It might mean hanging out with friends. It might mean having a Zoom group every afternoon to compare notes, but find a way to sort of keep your cup full, because it's a process. In the operations sense, it's like a bunch of steps you have to go through. Most of it isn't in your control, and it's a volume game. You just have to keep at it and do a lot of it until you find the right thing. So number one, find a way to stay resilient and find people who can support you. Number two, know that Patty and I and a lot of people like us are very grateful for your work, and really optimistic and excited about all the good you're going to do in the private or the nonprofit sector or in academia, and hope that at some point you go back into federal service, given all the good that you have done so far. So I'm very grateful for your work.
Me too. And thanks for having us. This has been great fun.
Yeah, thank you both. This is fantastic. As a reminder, this will be online. It will be on our website, FedSupport.org. So share with friends and colleagues. And Patty, Laszlo, I can't thank you both enough for being here. And thank you to all our federal audience out there as well. As both of you said, it's, the work that you all do is very, very important, and we're here to support you. So thank you both. And I hope everybody has a good evening.